A man chooses, a slave obeys.
Welcome to the Ethics in Video Games podcast, where we explore issues at the intersection of ethics and video games.
What follows is a series of graphic, interactive scenes that we can't show you.
All right, everybody. Ellie Cohen is our guest today. She's a PhD candidate at Princeton University and an assistant professor in the Entertainment Arts and Engineering program and Department of Philosophy at the University of Utah. You're our third guest from the University of Utah. Woo! You guys have such a great gaming program that we just love. You know, shout out to T and Jose Zagal. Her main research areas are in logic, metaphysics, epistemology, and the philosophy of video games, which is why she's here today. Welcome to the show, Ellie.
Thanks for having me, guys. Woo!
All right, so we are talking exploitation in microtransaction. That's the idea. And in an essay that you wrote called "The House Never Loses," you wrote this. So I thought we'd start with this. Imagine an industry that makes a business model much like a casino's, except in the most literal sense of the phrase, the house never loses. Not only would the house win in the long term, but every iteration of every game would be one where the house never cops up a cent. And curiously, it would be precisely because the house never has to pay out, because patrons can never win, but only lose something of value, that the model would be largely unregulated. Welcome to the video game industry, where the product is so enchanting that we almost forget the producers exploit us while we play. All right, I feel like you threw down a gauntlet here.
That's a bit exaggerated, right?
I mean, it sounds really good. So let's let's see if we get you to walk any of that back, or maybe not, right? But it's a nice kind of it's a nice way to get attention to the beginning of the podcast, obviously.
Right.
So that's why we're starting with it. But I do want to say this, right? When I buy something through a microtransaction or a loot box, a character in Polytopia, which is what I've been playing obsessively lately, a skin in Fortnite, a loot box in FIFA, right? I'm choosing to spend a few dollars on a product. We do this all the time out of games, right? It seems like an innocent, voluntary purchase. So what makes you especially concerned that microtransactions in gaming can be particularly exploitative?
So I honestly think you guys really nailed the core question on the head here with this. The thought that you're having, I'm just going to expand on it for a second, which I think is very natural, and I kind of agree with it to some extent. It's once we set aside issues with children and gambling addicts, aren't these just extremely normal, low-stakes commercial transactions among consenting adults? Yeah. It's not like anyone's holding a gun to our heads. It's not like we're being gouged for money or something like that. So it doesn't really seem like there's any coercion or force or fraud going on, maybe even not any deception, which I'll talk about later, maybe. And the consumer's rational, right? So she's perfectly capable of walking away from the offer. And if after that transaction she's unhappy, that's her problem. And then your question is okay, so Ellie, what's so especially bad about microtransactions? Why isn't it just like buying a bag of chips at the store?
Yep.
So one thing to get right off my chest, and I want to see if you guys agree with me too. I don't think they're that bad. I think there are tons of great things that microtransactions can do for the industry. There are lots of games that implement them in a way that's beneficial to everyone. And I think they can be really wonderful. And I agree that in most cases, producers aren't under any moral obligation to stop what they're doing. But I also think that there's something special going on. There's something different about this industry and buying a bag of chips at the store. Something objectionable, but just to a lower degree. It's not illegal, not morally impermissible in a lot of cases. And so you guys are wondering, what is that thing? So I think the big thing that's different about microtransactions is that they're presented to us inside of the game. While we're playing, while we're in that flow state, while we're immersed in this fictional world. And we're not like that when we're buying a bag of chips. And video games are really enchanting things. They're immersive. They're in a kind of highly distinctive way. So you can get immersed in a movie or a tabletop game, but movies let us be spectators to these fictional worlds. Games actually let us be part of them and interact with them. We can even create the stories inside of them and decide what happens to the characters or to ourselves. And developers do a remarkable job kind of creating these contexts for us to escape into and not just look down onto. And when we get into those, into that like state of mind when we're playing, we sort of shut off the outside world. Yeah. And I think when you present a real transaction to players when they're playing games, you're crossing some sort of line here. You're breaking a barrier from that world on the outside to the fictional world of the game. And that's, like there's a real monetary consequence for the decisions that you're making in a fictional setting when you're sort of trying to escape from the real world, maybe. Or I don't know about real world, the outside world.
It seems like another metaphor might be late night advertising with the phone numbers that you can call and immediately buy the thing that you're seeing. So it's late at night, you're watching television, you're probably in that zone, that similar sort of flow zone state. And then all of a sudden there's a thing to do. Now there is a little bit of friction there. Like you do have to go pick up your phone, dial a number.
Yeah. Right. And part of what I think ultimately is like what we should be pushing back on the industry is like create a little more friction for us, make it a little bit difficult, more difficult for us so we can take that moment to think like, okay, I actually have to walk to the phone. Right. Maybe I have to actually get out of the game to buy that cosmetic pack.
Yeah, why would I want to get out of the game? You know, it's interesting.
Why would I want to do that? Yeah.
I mean, the whole point is, right, I'm enjoying the game, right? It's interesting, the immediate microtransactions are so interesting because they do seem to be so unique, right? I mean, there's never really been a business model like this as far as kind of I can tell.
I mean, think about the snacks you buy on a train.
Okay, the snacks I buy in the train.
No, good, exactly. So like airplanes, right? There's so much. This is another point I was going to make too is, there's a ton of competition about which bag of chips you're buying. There's a ton of competition about which grocery store you're going into. And there's lots of competition about what game you're buying. But once you're in my game, there's no competition for who's selling you that microtransaction.
Oh, yeah.
So like, yes, lots of competition about which airline I pick, but
once
no
I pick an
competition.
Airline, though, there's no choice about what snacks I get.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, there is, right? You're just choosing between a very small variety of, let's say, your 2 potato chips, or right.
But they've already made the deal with one manufacturer, and they're going to show you that manufacturer's.
And I think it's even worse in microtransactions than the airline case because, for many reasons, but they gave us this desire for this gun, this skin. We didn't we had a desire to eat chips or something. We're going to be hungry on the plane. They're taking advantage of that moment, the airline industry. But there's something maybe slightly manipulative about giving us a goal or creating a desire and then trying to, give us our fix for it.
Wow. It sounds to me like you just described the cynical take on marketing. I don't know if it's cynical really, or the accurate take on marketing in general, like create a desire, right? Offer a solution for the desire, which where the desire is artificial. I mean, right. So in one sense, I mean, maybe this is part of kind of a tradition of doing that, but it seems to be very different. If you're in a world, if you're in an activity, if you're in an actual you called it a state of flow, right? Which itself is kind of interesting. So, but let's take a step back, and when we say to step back, let's talk about what exploitation is, because taking advantage of is very. It's not really clear what it means to take advantage of here. So, whether you want to use take advantage of or exploitative, what do you have in mind here?
Okay, so. The kind of standard definition of exploitation is sort of vague. So it's to exploit someone is to take unfair advantage of them. It has to be unfair. So if you think of like playing chess or Go, I've sort of given up there are certain things they're like new norms to the situation. So I'm like, it's okay if you trick me. It's okay if you see an advantage and take advantage of a weakness that you see in my defensive stones.
Right. That's a part of the game. Right. It's part of the magic circle.
Right. And we do this too with video games. We or lots of different sort of entertainment fiction setting. So like with books, I sort of want to let the author take me on this journey, surprise me, maybe even trick me and manipulate me, make me think one thing and then switch. It's weird when you're charging for me or charging on top of that. But so back to exploitation, it has to be unfair. So we can take advantage of someone or advantage of a vulnerability they have or a weakness they have. But in some sense, it has to be unfair as well. Because we don't want to say that the Go player or the chess player is being exploited, at least in the moral sense that we're interested in.
Before maybe we get into what's unfair, vulnerabilities. What do we mean here? Is it any kind of vulnerability, or are there going to be kind of special ways of creating a vulnerability?
No special thing in mind here. And I think this is really broad too. And you could have such a broad conception of vulnerability that I would be okay with, like maybe if you can take unfair advantage of it, it is a vulnerability. I don't know. So like if my loyalty to my mother could be taken advantage of, maybe you would call that a vulnerability, but I don't know.
No, I love that, because normally we think the vulnerabilities come first, and what's not fair is taking advantage of those vulnerabilities. Like we can say that, we have all these cognitive biases that are psychological vulnerabilities, like the sunken cost fallacy, let's say. Right. Great.
Good one. Yeah. Especially in this case.
And in the tabletop role-playing game world, we make use of this idea all the time. We can give characters, like champions, which came around in the 80s, asks you to, when you're creating your superhero, you also have to create these vulnerabilities for them that you're basically allowing the game master to take advantage of. So, I have something to do with kryptonite, or I have an old aunt who often shows up in the stories and I need to rescue. These are things that we've seen in games for many, 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 many years.
Right. So the key is going to be, when do you take an unfair advantage of them? Not really what the vulnerabilities are, because it seems like they could be almost anything.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's okay. And there's a lot of debate over this. And there's a lot of debate, of course, like a philosopher will take anything and go as far as they can. But I think. Yeah,
but I can imagine like in the Champions game, like it would feel unfair if, when the GM, I created this character and the character has an ant. And if the GM brings the ant into the game and then says, oh, by the way, it'll cost you $1 to save her.
Yeah. By the way.
Right. That would feel unfair.
Okay. Yeah. So I think really helpful thing to point out is that for a long time now, people have generally agreed that exploitation can be mutually beneficial. So and the general test, that a really rough, broad, vague test would be, am I worse off than I should have been rather than I would have been? So let's just give an example. Like, I'm allergic to bees. If Andy and I are hiking in the woods, it's very remote, and I get stung by a bee and he's the only one who has an EpiPen, then, he can sell it to me for whatever I have, right? If I have $25,000, he can do that because my choices are death or giving Andy $25,000. But there is a real sense in which something unfair is happening. I'm worse off than I should have been, even though I am better off than I would have been. Labor exploitation is like this too. So maybe I won't survive if I don't have any money, but it still doesn't mean it's right to pay me $2 an hour.
Right. So you're benefiting from my misfortune in this case. And you're creating additional misfortune in some sense for additional benefit. Right, in those kinds of situations, right?
Yeah, and reinforcing all these structural imbalances, and
Sure. Right. So if we take your B case, right? I can charge you $100, or I can charge you $100,000.
Yeah.
Right. If your life is on the line, right? Either one of those, in both cases, I'm helping you, right?
Right.
But in the first one, I'm charging you a nominal fee. Let's say it's not terrible. In the second one, I'm clearly gouging you, and I'm adding additional harm. Yeah. In the way that I'm taking advantage of your situation.
Right. And this happens with microtransactions too. So like I was saying before, with the monopolistic setting that they create, this temporary pseudo-monopolistic setting, we've like looked at data and, people will pay almost anything for a microtransaction. They're like highly inelastic goods. So
how much can we get some examples here?
Oh,
and what do you mean by inelastic?
That's
something I'm not super familiar with that term.
Okay, good. So like some examples of an elastic good, bags of chips. An example of an inelastic good, like tobacco products or insulin. So like an elastic good is one where the change in price results in a comparable change in demand, but an inelastic one doesn't. So you could basically hike up the prices for cigarettes, and people will still buy the cigarettes because
the demand is innate.
Yeah, it just doesn't. It's not affected by the price,
right?
To a significant degree.
Right. So let's say if I'm asking for if I'm going to get let's say one more extra try in Candy Crush.
Yeah.
Right. How much, is that the kind of thing that would be a lot? I mean, obviously, I'm assuming, the deeper I am into it, the deeper I care about it, the more I'm willing to pay. But there's got to be a kind of limit on what is sensible to pay.
Yeah. To some degree, right? But not really. There's it goes past what the consumer feels is a fair price in a sense. I mean, that's a way that you could look at it. They interestingly, cosmetic goods work like this too. I think. I mean, it's all very interesting, and the data is really like kind of, it's not super helpful for people like me because I'm not a part of like a production team or like a game company where I can have access to the exact data. So they'll give us these like kind of fake numbers.
Right.
But they still will like tell us the trends and communicate that, these goods we've found that they're inelastic.
Actually, sorry, Ellie, let me pause you for a second. I've really kind of always wondered about this. How does that happen? You ask, I mean, it's interesting because a lot of this is you're really kind of trying to look at data of what happens with microtransactions. But from what I understand, all that data is like super, super proprietary and not really shared. How does that work? How does someone research that stuff?
Yeah, it's also especially with the video game industry right now, which is in a lot of ways different and still like developing all of these regulations on top of it. Like there are all these interesting things about preserving video games for academics to even like look at. So I'm going to have to do that stuff more and I can get back to you, but I don't have like a quick answer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So now let's get back. The cosmetics I also don't want to abandon, but let's get back to the let's say Candy Crush situation or whatever, right? The idea is going to be that look, unlike let's say a normal product situation or maybe even a normal game situation, if you essentially gave me a sense of flow, let's say, and I don't know if we could talk about whether this needs to be accidental or intentional. But let's say the first thing is accidental, right? The levels were just made. You have just been doing great. You're feeling like you've been kicking ass and you've been amassing. I'm sticking with Candy Crush, I guess here.
Cool.
I found out recently, like somebody I knew was on level 4,400 something, and I was like, shit. Not only people still play Candy Crush.
You gotta raise your game.
I quit around 900, but I went really far, right? So let's say, right, you're in this kind of state of flow, and then you get the option, right, to get essentially, more items to help you kind of pass the next level, right? You're feeling like you're on a roll, which makes you more likely to buy those things. But that seems very different than, let's say, if the levels were made in such a way that I would start passing them faster and I would be essentially put into a state of flow, right? By the game designer as opposed to by chance of my own abilities. Right?
And your psychology, yeah.
Right. And then you get the uphill part, right? Where things become harder. And now I'm reaching for the microtransaction. Is that, like, now I can see how in the second part if I know that the game designer has put me into this situation and artificially created this kind of, I'm in it, I need it, right? So the desire is created for me, right?
Yeah. Well, it's exploitation if it's created. I mean, don't you think there is? Yeah. At least because
yes, but I need to push back a little bit.
Cool.
as the game designer in the room, I need to push back a little bit. And I've just finished rereading Celia Hodent's chapter about motivation in her book, The Gamer's Brain. Celia Hodent, another one of our guests.
She's great.
She's great, but basically, in order to get into that flow state, the stars really have to align in a very specific way. I can help it as a game designer. I can set things up in the hopes that you're going to get into the flow state, but there's so many other things that I don't have any control over. Your personality and your biology and your other motivational things to get you that. Likely, you're probably somebody. If you like the game that I've made, you're likely to be one of the people that will get put into that flow state by me. But I've got to push back a little bit and say I can't just press a button and put you in a flow state.
Well,
go for it.
I was going to say, what might be said then? Maybe the example I gave is unfair, but it just doesn't happen. I mean, that's possible, right? That if game designers could do this. And we can talk about whether they don't.
If we could.
Right.
And again, maybe there are situations where you could. Maybe this is a question about how much information you have about where I am, how much information you have about human psychology versus how I've been doing in the game. I mean, maybe it is possible to kind of, crunch that amount of information. But if this is the case, notice if we can agree that would be an exploitation, then a secondary question would be, and does that actually happen in microtransactions?
Right. But I also think it's uncool. Exploitation has this super negative moral charge to it, but it's and I do want to deflate that a little bit. It is somewhat uncool, even if there is a pre-existing defect or vulnerability in the consumer or the player. So, the examples that I like to talk about, if you're a football player in the middle of a game, you're going to be less likely to notice the severity of your head injury.
Right.
There are people rooting for you, people depending on you, and you're literally going to feel less pain. So that doesn't have a transaction in it. But if you're a cyclist and you're in the middle of a race and you're right near that end, you're right near the finish line and someone's right in front of you and you get the option to use or buy a sport enhancing drug, you're just more likely to take that offer, even if you'd regret it afterward, even if you would told yourself you would never do that in the beginning.
Right. And especially if the only friction was, do I press this button on the handlebar?
Right.
Yes, that's though again, right?
Or even just turn your bike a little bit to the left, you could accidentally do it. Yeah. Right.
No, I like it. I'm thinking about, I'm thinking about games where that's really kind of all you got to do, right? Just run through it. But it's interesting because part of me wonders if the very act of buying is exploitative here or not cool, whichever way we talk about it. I'm good either way. Or that it's not just a transaction, but the particular price that matters.
Oh, good. So there's a difference. Yeah, there's a difference between substantive exploitation, which is a disproportionate exchange in value. So the B case or the labor exploitation cases. And then there's procedural exploitation where something went wrong intuitively with the transaction itself, the procedure, even if, or the process of transacting, even if the prices are fair. And that's what I'm more interested in, right? Even if it's a perfectly fair price, if you're taking advantage of my ignorance of the product, that's exploitative. Or if I think it's a bit extreme to say that I'm rationally limited in these flow states. It's more like I've shifted my preferences a little bit. And that just makes me a different kind of rational actor. And I think you could take advantage of that. So maybe, again, back to the question of what's a vulnerability, you could still take advantage of me, even if that isn't, seen to most people as a vulnerability or a weakness. Yeah.
Okay.
And then there's this like maybe objectionable example that I use. Is it okay if I say it? It's a sex worker case.
Sure.
Sure. Yeah. So it's as if in the middle, so a sex worker in the middle of sex with a client stops to renegotiate the price or offer premium services for an increased fee. Yes, lots of crazy things going on there and differences between that case and the microtransaction case, but it's just supposed to make it very vivid that you're playing the game, you have these different goals and desires, you're very focused, you're kind of like channeling your focus into one thing, and then weirdly we're given that thing, right? T talks about this, like we're given the desires, right? And then you charge us. Okay,
so I like the distinction, right? We have one, and so let's leave the whole like exploitation, and I forgot the technical name you gave it, but the one where we're talking about the price itself is unfair, right?
Yeah, so substantive.
Substantive. Right. Let's leave that out of the way, and let's go with the procedural one. And can we get some more video game examples?
Let's give some examples. The classic one is Star Wars Battlefront 2. So let me just like explain that one. Electronic Arts 2017 hid key characters and weapons behind loot boxes. So those like probabilistic-y things, not always microtransactions, random items. They call them random items now.
Right.
Okay. So right. So it takes the average player over 40 hours to unlock a character like Luke Skywalker. And people find that pretty crazy to get everything for free. So to unlock the character for free. To get absolutely everything, it takes 4,500 hours or over 4,500 hours. And to put that into perspective, because like a big number like that, you can't really think about. It's the equivalent of playing the game for 2 hours a day for 6 years. Or 2 years working a full-time job. Right. So, and I mean, what's much worse about it, intuitively again, is that you're paying $60 for the game up front. So it sort of feels like an entrance fee to like a festival or fair, but you're not really told that you're going to be paying anything later on. And it's not just like $5 to get in, it's $60. And it's not $5 to get on the ride. It's like 40 hours of work, or $80 was what someone like wrote this angry Reddit post.
And the Luke Skywalker character is the first character that you can get, and you still have to work 40 hours to get there?
It's just a character you can get, and you'd have to kind of grind through the game. Yeah, so do like repetitive tasks, which can be fun.
But he's the main character of the
yeah. So there's this
trilogy,
like concept. So. Yeah, there's a concept of like I'm owed the core game, whatever that is.
Right.
And like some good experience, and it feels like Luke Skywalker is someone that would be given.
That seems the basis, right? I get the main three, and I get Han, Luke, and Leia.
And it's like a loot box, so I have a chance at getting these things if I pay too.
And that's 40 hours on average.
Yeah, grinding for free on average. Yeah, and
it could be longer.
And grinding is work, right? Grinding is not enjoyable. So let's make that clear. But okay, notice what we have here with this case. We have a case of is this a case of deception? Well, that might be, is the problem here that procedurally we're taking advantage of a situation where the reason this is all happening, or the reason we can't take advantage, is because of deception, and maybe that's the problem? Or is this a situation where there's enough ambiguity in what you're supposed to get in a game that again, notice with the fairness issue, if I'm deceiving you, that seems like it's unfair, right? But if the very idea of what you're supposed to get in a game is itself ambiguous in some way, then maybe it's less unfair. Though, if I knew that you're expecting one thing and I'm giving you something else, right?
We've gotten ahead of it a little bit, because we had the idea is that I can spend 40 hours not paying microtransactions, but I could by paying some get these characters much quicker, right?
presumably, right?
Yeah.
Just keep paying, and it's going to be like $80. So
Right, and it'll keep going up each time you do it, because we've known for a long time that the players who are willing to give $1 are also willing to give $20, and also willing to give $100, and also willing to give $500.
the whales, yeah.
Right. Right. There's a
big
bunch of
fish.
people and there's a lot of money in the world, and some people can afford it, and it's chump change to some people, but to other people it can be quite a lot.
Yes.
So, whether I stop at $1 or I stop at $20 is one of those things where if they know, and we know as developers that if players are willing to spend $1, they're probably willing to keep spending dollars, and in multiple sets of dollars.
There's a feeling of maybe this is gambling.
Right.
Even
there's
if by
certainly
US law,
there's certainly a
yeah.
feeling of, ooh, that's a person we want to have playing, because they will pay money and continue to pay money.
Okay,
Yeah.
so at that point, right? At that point, does that recognition matter? I guess is one of the questions we could ask you, right?
Yeah.
If I'm recognizing, right, I'm the designer, I'm recognizing, look, this is one of those players, right, that I can keep pushing. They have essentially the kind of vulnerability that I think is going to work with this. Does it matter if I'm conscious of this, or if my algorithm just happens to target instead of identify those people?
If you're conscious of it, I feel like there's an intuition that you might have that, like, yeah, it's worse if you're not ignorant. But people disagree with that, right? Yeah, go ahead, Andy.
I was gonna say it's kind of a moot point, because we've been aware of it for at least 10 years.
There you go. We know this is happening.
As an industry, this has been common knowledge for at least 10 years.
And I mean, one thing to say too is, like, we should allow people to indulge in their vices to some degree if they want to, like, it's okay that I think it's okay that we have alcohol available, but and it's okay to have casinos. I could get like endless pushback for that. But, the thing that I think is, and we should have microtransactions, because again, there's a huge list of great things that they do for the industry, but do the things that the casinos are doing, like give us more control. So put self-bans, or like, let me self-ban myself. Let me put a spending limit on myself when I'm in that state of mind, when I'm gambling, and respect that person on the outside of the casino or outside of the game, the person who's not intoxicated, rather than that person who's in the middle of gameplay. And people are the industry is doing this. So just to give them credit, Xbox has spending limit controls. I think we do this on phones too, for children especially. Lots of other countries have gone a lot farther with this too.
Right. But it's interesting that it did take the industry basically 10 years to go, oh, right, we should probably not do this.
Oh, right. Yeah, probably. Yeah, exactly. It makes you wonder a little bit.
We figured out how to exploit people well before we thought about whether or not we should.
Right.
Well, things before there's pushback, things like that rarely get resolved, right? Right. And the EA case with Star Wars, right, is about the biggest pushback that that there was.
The most downvoted Reddit post of all time is when EA tries to say, like, people love gambling, people love loot boxes, like, they're fun.
It's true, but we didn't. I think the main complaint was that idea that we had to pay $60 to get in.
Yes,
right.
And then we had to also pay then they're continually asking us to pay more,
right, for this extra stuff. Yeah.
Which makes me also wonder. So notice, to go back to the, again, I forgot what you called it. Not the procedural, but the other one.
Substantive.
Substantive, right? It's interesting, right? Because whatever big anticipated game does come out, and let's say it is kind of a Star Wars game, and Star Wars fans have to have that game. It's interesting how the price itself, again, even without the microtransactions, itself could be potentially exploitative, because it's that IP, though you still have fandom, and knowing that people are particularly vulnerable to buying crap, for whatever they're fans of. But it's still different than having you in this kind of within the game in the flow state.
Yeah, and there's like
giving you transactions at that point.
Yeah, and again, just to like, because I don't want to demonize any of this too much, like a lot of the content is really great and really fun, and and like especially when the designers are the ones in charge of microtransactions and they're the ones saying like, okay, I'm the person who's best situated to figure out what the player wants and what's fun about this game to keep to my design pillars or whatever. And when they're in charge of it, they can have a really great integrative system. Yeah. But there was another point I was going to say. Oh yeah, there are also great games with great like microtransactions. So like the one that I like to point at is Ghost Runner. Have you guys played this game?
No.
Highly recommend if you like intense games. Yeah. So this came out like late 2020 and I got very obsessed with it. It's like a post-apocalyptic cyberpunk first-person platformer action game with like parkour elements. Yeah. It's very hardcore and fast-paced. So small development team, just another like reason why microtransactions can be good, because that it allows smaller teams to break into the industry. It's at least one way to do that. Or maybe I've just been like initiated too much.
No, but it's true. It's democratized the industry. There aren't, because you don't need a giant publisher to say, yes, I'll make your game.
Yeah.
And then back it with, a big pile of money. You can actually sort of do that yourself with. Yeah.
Make it free. You can even have it like shorter, like a demo length. And then if it works, you don't have to invest so much time up front.
That's right.
Yeah. So they released this was like a highly successful game really early on. And they released a purely cosmetic winter pack for $1.99, nice and cheap. It's just like a skin for your glove and for your sword. You've got like a katana. And it's only available outside of the game, so you have to stop the game and go to Steam and buy this pack. And I think that's great.
Right.
I don't think like you have to take it out of the game. This is just like a paradigm, great example. I can now support that development team and feel good about it.
Right. So this brings me one of the games that comes into question in my classes when we talk about this stuff is Magic the Gathering.
Cool.
And so they're like, well, how is it different from Magic the Gathering? And that's a really good example of why you can't buy more Magic cards, physical Magic cards while you're playing Magic the Gathering physically. Now, that's not true if you're playing it electronically, I believe. I think you can buy it within but even so, you can't do it while you're literally in a game with somebody.
Right. It creates like, you've got these like separate contexts. And even if it's in the game or something like that, it's not in the game.
Right, exactly.
Like during the gameplay.
It's in the software, but not during gameplay.
So I want to ask really quick, because this focus on, I think it's pretty clear, right, that your chances of buying things because your vulnerabilities are being exploited are much lower if you're buying the game item outside of the game, right? But you guys both agree that sometimes it's cool to do it inside the game. In fact, it could be really annoying to have to, I have to go to Steam to buy like a $2 little item for my game. It seems like, so I'm kind of wondering, what then is it that's going to be essentially within the game that deciding factor of whether it's too much to have it in the game, right? Of whether you really need to move it out of game.
Yeah, well, like,
oh, that's a good question.
That is a really good and hard question, right? Even just placing it in the menu, though, like it can be in the game, just taking that slight step. I don't know if anyone's done the thing I'm about to say, but like, if there were a way to signal to like if you could walk up to a store in the game, like a physical building or something, or sorry, virtual building, and it had some sort of symbol to communicate to the player that this was like a real transaction, that would just like a little click in your head, that would be like, okay, I'm walking to the telephone now. But yeah, hard question.
It's interesting, right? In that case, the whole point is just to remind the player that you are engaging in a financial transaction.
Yeah.
And can't just a pop-up just tell you, hey, look, reminder, you are engaging in a financial transaction. Is that not enough?
Maybe it is. I don't know. I don't know. It's annoying too. But.
Well, right. So right. The idea is not to annoy people, but I was just reading an interesting article called, and I don't remember who wrote it, but it was an economist, and he was talking about how choices are bad.
Yes.
And which is counterintuitive to all people making games, right? Because we think that choices are interesting and choices are good if they're interesting kinds of choices. But he just says all choices are bad, and the reason behind it is there's two reasons, but the one that's relevant to this conversation is that it slows everything down, and that actually could be a valuable thing to do in this situation, right? This may be all that you need to do is basically just put one more choice or a couple more choices.
That's actually a great idea. Like, I haven't thought about that. Like, maybe it's better to have like 7 things in your store than just one thing or something like that. Because it makes you take just a moment, even if it's highly immersive in all other ways, or integrated into the game. But if you're like, wait, do I want this, that, or that? And it's not done in the typical deceptive way where like one thing is ridiculously overpriced and so you would never buy it.
Right. Yes.
Interesting.
Yes.
Cool.
Speaking of, it's interesting that stores where you, I've had experiences in stores. I started playing this gambling game, Coin Master, and the game is literally a slot machine, and all the microtransactions are essentially, you can get more spins. You can get. It's interesting because I've never had anything kind of get me so invested as a damn slot machine, which is entirely based on luck and whatever money, and I can win spins or money to spend to build up my village, essentially is the way it goes. And once I'm done my village, it's the next village. It's such a stupid game. And yet I played it for weeks, right? But the microtransactions on it gave me pause because could never figure out what was the best deal. And
I love that.
Because I was like, do I need to get more spins, or is it better money, or is it more stuff to feed my magic animals that gave me? And it's interesting in some cases, right? Just having enough there so that you can't simply say, do I want to buy the 10 spins or the 50 spins or the 100 spins? Then I'm assuming, or the best value, 1,000 spins, right? I mean, then I'm assuming whatever is going to be the most expensive provides me the best value. I don't need to think about it. The minute I need to think between qualitatively different things, now maybe I don't want to make a mistake, and maybe I want to pause and kind of think what's going to be good for me.
Yeah, I like this idea.
Yeah.
Though it's still a shitty game that no one should play. And
I know.
And yet you are deep into it.
Yeah, we have such a desire to see like a pattern like show up on the screen that we're like, okay, next time the pattern will. I don't know. I'm just making something up.
No,
it's true.
I was going to write about this game at some point. It has all these things in it, like you can raid other people's villages, or rather it randomly has you raiding other people's villages, which makes you feel like you're competing against other people. It makes you feel like you got ahead and you're getting ahead. And here we are at the created desires, right?
Oh, I have an example for you guys.
Okay.
Go for it.
Give it to me.
Okay, so I'm just going to start off by saying it wasn't implemented in the game, and you'll see why.
Okay.
So in 2015, Activision patented this algorithm for Call of Duty World War II. A matching algorithm. So like typically a matching algorithm will just like pair players randomly or by skill, like chess.com or most shooting games. But they're like, here's an idea. What if we pair paying players with non-paying players, basically guarantee that the paying ones will win, not tell them really about this. It's hidden somewhere. You could go look. So we're transparent. And then reward bombard them with advertisements with the specific weapon that they lost to, the non-paying players.
Mm-hmm.
And then once they buy it, reward them by putting them on the other side of the algorithm. So they'll win every time.
Right.
Awesome, right?
Wow.
So yeah, not implemented in the game. I know, it's kind of genius. I like all this kind of stuff. Like you give them a little respect.
Evil geniuses, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, that definitely falls into feeling dishonest. There's something dishonest about that, right? Even though
Right.
you can dig and find the information, nobody's going to. It's at the very least lying by omission.
I think it gets at both things. It's both a transparency thing and a bit of a in the flow, like taking advantage of your desire to win thing. One of my friends from college, she writes about games for Wired now, Cecilia D'Anastasio. So she wrote this. She's awesome. You should interview her.
I would love to interview her. She is just awesome. She's my favorite.
She wrote this
she's my favorite game journalist. Yeah, she's just really great.
She's so good. Yeah, she's great. So she wrote this review of Cyberpunk. I don't know if you've read it, but she starts out by saying, I think this is perfect. Like, I couldn't have said this better. You can't squeeze a video game like you can an apple to check its quality, but it wouldn't matter anyway because game publishers would just dunk it in enough shiny wax to disguise any perfection. So the deception, right?
Right.
So there's this transparency issue. And they've sort of mitigated it a little bit by introducing the ESRB ratings last year and the year before, or a few years before that, for microtransactions and random items.
Right.
But I think it still persists, this issue, because game companies will give YouTubers and streamers demos of their games for review, and it won't include, I think, very important features like microtransactions. They'll come out with the reviews, people will buy the game. And then not only that, updates. So this is another special thing about the video game industry is that, they are more like services. And people keep saying this, and it's great because we can update and fix problems with the game, but there isn't any restriction on this to not put microtransactions in or loot boxes in later. So there's this question like, have you undermined my consent to the original transaction if you introduce something like that?
Right.
Interesting. New elements. And it's interesting. I mean, you would think if microtransactions are simply an additional extra element that you don't need to take advantage of, right?
And it's true. If I feel like I've gotten the complete game, I don't have any issues. But it's in those moments where the game feels incomplete and they're asking me for more money.
Yeah,
actually, Nitro Fueled is so Crash Team Racing Nitro Fueled is an example of game that did exactly what I just said, like with the reviews and with the update a month later after release. And they also had explicit interviews where they were like, "Oh, don't worry, we'll never monetize in that way."
Right.
Yeah. These seems to be like totally different bad things to do. To be read. The transparency stuff, and the play testing to, the leaving the microtransactions out is really interesting for why they would do that for reviewers.
And that's interesting because that's basically they've hacked the review process.
Yeah.
Right. They know that these magazines want to get their reviews in as quickly as possible and can't wait to buy the thing off the shelves or out of the store, out of the app store. And so they've hacked that process.
And it's it's so sad to me because like the game community is such a collaborative community, and like people who make games play games, people who play games contribute to making games. And that's so sad. It's not a traditional producer-consumer relationship. And so treating it like one is a mistake.
So that's super interesting there by itself, right? This idea that our industry is in some ways very different because of this sort of community feeling to it. Like, and because I've noticed that as well, that there's a handful of game designers that people know about and care about, unlike, movie directors where there's a lot of them that we know about and care about, or movie stars. Movie stars can sell a movie. It's unlikely for a movie design or a game designer to be able to sell a game. It doesn't happen very often that there is that sort of star game designer sort of thing. But at the same time, there are these franchises that are stars. It's the franchises themselves. And we feel, because we've been playing them, and there's this sort of Sam Ashwell talks about the sort of meta agency that we have, where as players of these games, we have this communication pattern back and forth between the developers, and we can influence how the next version of the game is going to go through, Reddit or in reviews or any of these sorts of things. We have this agency that can be undermined.
Right. And it generates special norms in that relationship, because I feel like maybe not a friendship, but something closer to that than I do with the chip industry.
Right.
And so I feel especially, it's it feels worse when a friend does something bad to you than if someone else that you didn't know did the same thing, right? Obviously. Right. And that's what it feels like, I think.
I have to say I'm completely fascinated by using the influence in reviewers on this, and I'd like to have a future episode
also genius
specifically kind of about the usage of reviewers. I was especially thinking of games like a lot of free-to-play games where you play the game, but you play one round and then you got ads, and then you play the round again and then you got ads, and they're all trying to sell other games, which is frankly a model I'm still confused about, because the other games seem to do the same thing. But I could see someone getting a review of it and they left the ads out, and it's just a totally different experience.
Oh yeah.
Right. And it's interesting of what if this is kind of part of the responsibilities of game companies too. It's weird because when you sell a TV show, let's say you're going to send, let's say, the TV show to reviewers. Obviously, it's not going to have commercials in it, because you expect, let's say, if it's on television, you expect they'll have commercials, and if it's streaming, you expect that it won't have comommercials, I guess.
Right, and then we feel betrayed when HBO shows us commercials, because we're already paying for HBO.
That's right.
Yes,
right.
This new thing, it kills me. Yeah.
Right.
It's a betrayal.
It is a betrayal.
It is, and it's interesting because in a way, it kind of feels like it borrows a little bit from the microtransactions.
Oh,
where you're double dipping somehow,
it's weirdly normalizing it, right? We're just going to get used to this, and this is the way it's going to be.
Yeah, that's right.
So there's a mitigating factor in this, is that when games first started costing $60, there was a giant pushback for it at the time. But at the same time, they were also being sold in stores. So they were box product, and 30% of that went to the retailer, or 50% of it went to the retailer, 50% of it went to the distributor, and then 25% went to the publisher and developer, at whatever split that they have.
Right.
And
so now that's very different.
And that's very different now, and it's much less expensive to publish a game.
Right.
Because it's downloadable, and so that's allowed the price to stay at $60, which is what they had finally decided was what people would pay for a game. Right.
So it's not as if microtransactions then. So we kind of see where microtransactions fit in here, right? If microtransactions are an absolute necessity, then maybe that justifies a certain understanding from customers to kind of, even
if they're not a necessity, there are these other good things that they lead to, and so we should be understand. And it several years ago, I was much more prickly about this. It's taken some time. / just get used to it and submit to the
right. That's also maybe. That game companies are also gotten feedback about what's not acceptable about some of these things over time. That's also possible. It's
mostly just about how they're doing it in some ways that, again, they can do this. It's permissible, I think. There's just something come on.
Right.
I think there's room in morality for a little bit more gray area. There are people who are doing more than they have to, and they're the heroes, they're the great people. And then there are people who are doing the bare minimum. They're doing all the permissible things, but they're still people you don't want to hang out with.
Right.
Okay. So Ellie, you said exploitation isn't the only problem with microtransactions, right? That microtransactions and loot boxes corrupt player values. Now, I'm dying to understand what that means. What do you think? What happens? What do you have in mind here?
Okay, so this is a hedgy response. It's the basic thought is it's analogous. It should ring, violent video game bells. And it is analogous to that old concern that, violent games represent violence as the best or only means to success. And because games are powerful teachers, that can corrupt our values in some way and make criminals out of us or something like that.
Right.
And I think most people now agree that that's an unsound argument in some way. So gamers were never really themselves worried about it. And most people have a good sense for the difference between reality and fiction. Even kids, I've talked to tons of kids who are like, I'm going to go kill some people, but it's just a game, so they're like, they know. And not only just the anecdotal evidence, there's lots of evidence suggesting that violent games don't make people violent. Maybe they make you less sensitive to violent images. Maybe there are some negative or positive upshots to that. And I think there's a great article in The Guardian just that points at 23 studies all having to do with this. So there's an analogous worry for microtransactions and loot boxes, which is, so let's say a spin to win or a pay to win game is one that represents payments or chance as the best or only means to success. Now, because games are powerful teachers, that can corrupt our values and make us less likely to put effort into things in the real world. It corrupts a traditional work ethic. This is a basic argument, I think, that comes from the Bible, that against gambling, that it corrupts a traditional work ethic. There's more to that, but now there have been articles that are coming out recently, last year recently, that games with loot boxes do actually make players more likely to gamble in the future, and even more so with younger players. So I'm inclined just to be careful about this. I'm inclined to think that, maybe it does corrupt. I don't know about corrupting a traditional work ethic. That's one step farther than what I just said. Right. But it does, and probably we need more corroborating evidence, just like in the violence case. We have tons of studies that are all suggesting this. But it's an argument that I'm floating around and that I'm interested in, but I don't know how far it goes. What are your intuitions about it?
Andy, do you want to take that or?
Yeah, no, I've never honestly thought about it.
I think it's interesting. The idea that the more you engage, and mind you, this will be different for loot boxes and microtransactions. Right. It's interesting because I was thinking, microtransactions are a constant way to maybe encourage consumerism, right? And encourage it's I want to say materialism, though it's interesting. Of course, these are not material things, right? But
maybe I don't know.
But it's still the constant desire to feel like, oh, it's not enough. I need another skin. I need another car for my Rocket League. Team. I need another weapon. I need another this. I need another that. To me, that might be more convincing than the loot boxes thing. I don't know about work ethic, but gambling, sure.
I don't know. Yeah.
As a collector, I feel like I don't have a leg to stand on because I've got 40,000 comic books and probably 150 Hot Wheels around me, and so I don't know whether that's certainly as a kid, and Shlomo, you've got your boy is probably similar about this. There's if there's a thing that he's into, he would have all of it.
If he could have the entire Harry Potter, if he could just own Harry Potter, he would be very happy.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But then we tend to grow out of that sort of stuff after a while. We realize that, that the thing that we were into last year may not be the thing that we're into this year.
Yeah, but I don't know. But the habit of shopping, the habit of continuously looking for expecting for things to be a little bit better because you can buy that additional thing, right? That is and I don't know, and look, and buying additional things a lot of times do make things better. you know?
Yeah.
I keep buying.
I think we just learn to be more discerning about that sort of stuff, because that's just something we get experience with. We're like, oh, that thing that I bought, it didn't scratch the itch, so now I know I don't need to buy more of those things.
Except when you have an itch that you're conditioned to keep scratching, and that
right.
That only works when it gets satisfied once in a while. If it stops being satisfied, you will stop. You will stop. The Skinner box effect doesn't persist if you don't get something once in a while out of it.
Sure. Though, again, I'm thinking about, I'm thinking about people who shop a lot for the sake of shopping, where their closet is full of clothes and shoes that they really, really don't need. Shopping itself becomes an activity. It's not exactly the same thing here, right? Because the activity here is not exactly getting microtransactions, but it sometimes could be with things like skins.
I like shopping. I enjoy shopping.
Right. But, again, I think there's a point where it goes too far, and I don't have a way to define that point. And again, this is if you are corrupting player values, this is the direction that I thought of. And I'm not saying it actually happens, but as opposed to the to the gambling part.
I was gonna say, because that sort of gets us around towards things like alcoholism or any sort of addiction, right? So we're sort of back around to is it enabling sort of addictive behavior?
Yeah, maybe.
Maybe. Okay, Ellie. So last question. What should be the takeaways here? What should players and game companies take from this whole possibility of exploitation?
So I touched on it a little bit earlier, but I think the biggest takeaway is really general. It has to do with this collaborative community that we have, and to not take advantage of each other, because I think everyone will lose in the end like that. And there's a responsibility on both sides. It's not just the gaming producers that have to mitigate damages. The consumer also has to, help themselves too. So yeah, I think the main thing is get back to that collaborative space.
All right.
That's great.
All right. Thank you, Ellie. Ellie Cohen was our guest, professor in the Entertainment Arts and Engineering program in the Department of Philosophy at University of Utah. Ellie, we hope to have you back at some point. We'd love having you. We'd love talking to you again. Good podcast. GP, guys.
Thank you so much. This was really fun.
All right. Play nice, everybody.
You can subscribe and listen to all of our episodes wherever you listen to podcasts.